All right, everybody. Welcome to the Contextual Christian Church Bible Study. Today we're going to get into Second Kings, chapter 17, verse 32 to chapter 18, verse 4. I'm going to pray it in and we'll get started. Everybody bow your heads. Father, thank you for getting us together on this Saturday. I know we all had some things going on. It's been a busy Saturday, but we all took the time to get into another fun and important Bible study that we're going to get some good context in, get some good notes in. With this one, I pray that get the we can get it and understand it a little bit better. I also pray that there's something like an interesting detail with this one specifically, something that we may not have read before that we can that it, uh, kind of wake us up a little bit, or maybe in just a whole new detail entirely. And in Jesus' name, Amen.
Amen. All right. So last time we started in verse 19 and went to 31, same chapter of 17 as we're starting today. And what we saw is that Judah, after it just brought up about all the other tribes having to be rejected by God because they did not follow God's commandments, but walked away entirely, as it pointed out for them. But then it said in verse 19 that even Judah did not keep God's commandments. So afterwards, God rejected all the seed of Israel and afflicted them, or in other words, punished them. And then he gave them into the hands for people to take their stuff away and cast them out of his sight. As we talked about not being in his presence because he had chosen Israel to be that promised land. And they had to be kicked out entirely. As we talked about, as we read about from before, where they were doing a secret sin. They were starting to hide it and be secretive about it. And the end result was that they left entirely against God. Everything they did, they not one commandment of God's were they trying to follow. So when that time had come, he let the Assyrians take over. They brought men from Babylon and from an area called Cutha and Ava and Hamath, and it went down a list. But it was interesting because they weren't following God's commands either. But of course not, though. They're not men and women who were supposed to know. But as we talked about with whether or not we're judged or condemned for the sins that we do, it depends if we're capable of knowing or not. And they were capable of understanding right and wrong. They just hadn't taken the time to figure out what was required. And so God had sent, as it brought up, lions to go and kill them. There were lions killing them. And so afterwards, when after some people had died, the king of Assyria, he went and got one of the, or some of the priests of the children of Israel to tell them what are the requirements for this God, because they got tired of people dying, showing that even people that were not followers of God understood if he's the one in charge of this land, we need to abide by his rules. And if we got to abide by his rules, then we need to figure out what his rules are. Something that even Christians today still don't get. You can't just claim you follow God when in reality you're following the preacher. You never read the Bible to see if what the preacher said was right. You just accepted it. And then we finished up how it went into the final portion 29, where every nation made gods of their own. All these other gods, these man-made gods that they made to worship. And then at the end, with the men of Babylon, they made theirs, and it just went down the list to the Avites, to the Nibhaz, and Tartak, all of these. And then at the last point, it pointed out that they burnt their children in fire to one of their gods. So we talked about how it was literally setting the children on fire, burning them. Now, we don't necessarily know if they were burnt to death, but we do know that they were burnt. And that's where we continue today, was after that point. as I'll go ahead and switch it over to the first section. And go ahead, Charles, when you're ready.
So I'll be getting into 2 Kings chapter 17, verses 32 to 36. I'm going to give it a couple seconds. All right, verse 32. So they feared the Lord and made unto themselves of the lowest of them priests of the high places, which sacrificed for them in the house of the high places. They feared the Lord and served their own gods, after the manner of the nations whom they carried away from thence. Unto this day they do after the former manners. They fear not the Lord, neither do they after their statutes, or after their ordinances, or after the law and commandment which the Lord commanded the children of Jacob, whom he named Israel, with whom the Lord had made a covenant and charged them, saying, Ye shall not fear other gods, nor bow yourself to them, nor serve them, nor sacrifice to them. But the Lord who brought you up out of the land of Egypt with great power and a stretched out arm, him shall ye fear, and him shall ye worship, and to him shall ye do sacrifice. So I want to start with 32 and 33. It looks like we're still continuing from the group that went to that the king of Assyria. He sent men from Babylon to Samaria. He sent the people of Katha, Ava, Hamath, and from
Not
Safar,
Katha, Kutha.
Kutha, Ava, Hamath, and Safar Vayim. So it looks like we're still continuing that they're the ones that feared the Lord. They're the ones that went and found some of the lowest people, lowest of the low. Sound like with the lowest, like scumbags, basically. You make them priests of the high places, which they're sacrificing in those high places, and
Try
bringing up
again,
that
though.
they try again with the lowest of the low.
Mm-hmm. Think about what it would mean at that time, or think about what else it could mean with the low. Does
The
low
lowest
mean low down dirty? Is that newer, or is that something that's always sounded like that?
with the lowest of this time period, this would have to be what this would have to be those that wasn't like they didn't have fields, they didn't have the jobs, they didn't have employment, they wasn't working and doing all this stuff.
Yeah.
They're basically unemployed. Well, I'll just say the lowest of the unemployed, the ones that wasn't working the farms, doing this. They wasn't soldiers.
Now,
he
how do we
th-
know it means that and not the other that you brought up the first time?
well, you brought up something I didn't think about from that time period, because from that time period, the lowest would be people that just wasn't doing anything, that wasn't working, that wasn't producing anything, contributing to anything, compared to what we got today, which we have all kinds of definitions for the low in our day. We have all kinds of low. They didn't have so many back then.
Not only that, but what did we just see going on? It said they feared the Lord, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you fear God and you're picking the low, are you picking the low as in the unrighteous and the ones that are sinful? Can you be doing that and fearing the Lord at the same time?
No, that wouldn't be a smart decision. So
Smart, that's the wrong word.
that wouldn't be a good decision then.
Not even good. This is not about a good or bad decision. That decision doesn't make sense at all. It doesn't work with the logic of the individual. Charles, is it possible for me to be in a moment of fearing the Lord and also in the same exact moment stealing from somebody?
Is it possible? 99.9% no.
No, 100% no. Stealing is a sin, right?
It
If
is a
I'm
sin.
truly fearing God in the moment, am I going to be capable of stealing from somebody?
You have the word truly. No, no.
Even without the word truly, if I fear the Lord at the moment, you either fear the Lord or you don't, right? Is there a partial fear of the Lord?
No, it's the hypocritical, but no, there's no partial to it.
Yeah,
You either
you
do
either
or you
fear the
don't.
Lord or you don't. So if I fear the Lord at that moment, then I'm not going to be stealing from somebody because I'm focused on the fear of the Lord. I'm focused on doing what God wants.
Mhm.
In the same token here. So you see why saying it's not a good decision doesn't actually work?
Oh yeah, now I see it in that part.
Okay. So just to be sure, explain to me how it doesn't work.
So, well, it doesn't make sense in the context of what we just talked about. It doesn't make sense for them to bring someone of the lowest of the low that is that's bad, that's evil, that's this, that's that, if they fear the God or if they fear God itself, you know.
And how is that different from, no, I said that's not the part. You're just re-saying what I said. I want to make sure you understand it. What is wrong or incorrect about saying, like, how is it incorrect? Not just the fact it is. How is it incorrect to in your explanation, say it's a bad decision for them to bring it, for them to bring the low, meaning somebody sinful?
Other than saying it
How is
doesn't
the
make
term
sense,
bad decision not
because
like
bad is
how is
not
that
a
incorrect?
bad is like a bad is not a, well, it's not really a strong enough term that I could use for the situation. It's an irrelevant term in that case then.
Yeah, there you go. Bad is an irrelevant term. Bad is a word that relates to levels, severity. Something is good or bad, that's on a spectrum of levels it could be. But if something is an impossibility, can it be bad or good? No, because it's an impossibility. So if in the moment of being you're fearing the Lord, if that's what's going on in the moment, then it's not a good or bad thing. That's a bad explanation because it's an impossibility that you would do that, not just a bad choice. Because a bad choice requires the fact that it be possible to be choosing that. Whereas based on the mindset of that, it's not a possibility. So yeah, it's an irrelevant answer because it doesn't answer that question. It doesn't actually explain or correctly entail what's been said. So good. Yeah. Irrelevant answer is
So
why.
what I would say is for the men that feared God, um, it's an interesting, well, we make sense, but it's still an interesting decision to bring those men to be the priests, to still do those sacrifices in those high places. But it did bring up that even though they feared God, they still served their own gods, the gods from their nations. Now,
Mm-hmm.
verse 34, let me reread it because it's throwing me off. Unto this day, they do after the former manners. They fear not the Lord, neither do after their statutes or after their ordinances or after the law of the commandment. So we just read about the group, the men that I talked about earlier, going to Samaria, them fearing God, but going to their own gods, still serving their own gods. But then verse 34, it talks about unto this day, they do after the former manners. They fear not the Lord. The other they that I'm thinking about possibly is only the children of Israel,
No.
going down the list of them not doing this, that.
Well,
Because
keep in mind
why
when it
would it
says that
make
they fear the Lord, who are we talking about that fear the Lord?
they were the men I brought up earlier, the Avah, the
Yeah.
men going to Samaria.
Yeah, we're talking about the Assyrians, not the children of Israel. What does the word former mean?
Um, Former would be what previous, before.
Yeah. So what is the previous thing that they did before they feared the Lord?
Oh, well, it breaks it down. Well, hold on. After the former, they fear not the Lord, neither do they after their statutes, or after their ordinances, or after the law and commandment which the Lord commanded the children of Jacob, whom he named Israel. That's what I'm trying to make it make sense about them not doing the Lord's commandments, rules, and all of that. How could they do it? They didn't know it.
Oh, remember, they brought a priest over. We read about that last time to tell them what God required so they could know it. See, and keep in mind here, when it said they feared the Lord, does that necessarily mean that they followed God? When I brought up the example of if I'm in the moment of fearing the Lord, am I going to, in the low, is going to be the sinfulness? Well, if I fear God, if I fear the Lord, does that mean that I'm going to necessarily follow him 100%? Yeah, if I'm in the moment of it. But if I have some abstract fear, that's why I said if you true like when you said about, well, you said truly fear. It's like, yeah, well, if I'm in the moment of fearing, in the moment of that, but can I have a fear of something that's more abstract? That like I'm not in the moment where I'm truly focused, but I do have some fear of it.
Right. Yeah, you
Exactly.
can.
So we see that, and that's what I was getting into earlier about like if they're in a moment of fearing. Remember, I didn't say that they didn't that you can't fear the Lord and still do sin. I said if you're in a moment of where you're fearing the Lord, if you're in a moment where this is your focus, you're not going to do the other things.
So that's that. Yeah, and the way they worded it was it
You
was
see what
so
I'm
confusing the
saying?
way they worded it. So this is just an example of them fearing the Lord in the moment. But even though we talked about the priest that was supposed to tell them what to do and this, that, and the third, they still didn't do it. The laws
Exactly.
that God had put, that God already talked about, we read about in like Exodus and all of that, all the rules, laws, regulations,
Exactly. So
and about
they had a moment where they feared God. They feared the Lord. I mean, they just had these lions kill their people. So of course they felt it for the moment. But then what does it say in 32 right after it said they feared the Lord? They feared the Lord and they made the lowest of themselves priests of the high places, which sacrificed for them in the houses of the high places. So they didn't want to bring somebody in that's high and mighty. But then as it goes in 33, they feared the Lord and served their own gods after the manner of the nations whom they carried away from that. So all
the
the
nations
people
they
that they
came
brought
from.
away, they're serving them too.
Hmm.
So what we're seeing between 32 and 33 is not just that they fear the Lord, but that he's only one person that they fear. They fearing all kinds of gods. They might as well be the Greeks and Romans of the time. Where my brother Zeus at?
Poseidon, Ephesus,
Poseidon, yeah,
Hercules, all of
all the
that,
different anyone that could be pick a god, any god. Well, whatever that god wants, we're gonna do right by all of them. Like,
which
no,
is interesting because they have the knowledge that the children of Israel only to fear one God, but they're still fearing, we still got to watch out for Hercules. We still got to watch out for Hades. We still got to watch out for all these other.
exactly.
That's interesting. They're all
So
over the
keep
place.
exactly. So think about that in mind with that. Yeah, they had a moment, they feared the Lord, but now when we read about the high places, that's why I said they're in that moment, they're not thinking about that, they're thinking about like the low. So at this time frame, when we think about what low is, we're not talking about somebody going out and stealing and killing and all this stuff. We're talking about somebody that doesn't have much. They're the lowest in society, like financially, like you said before. So we have some semblance of the impact of God on them, even though that moment was passed over really quickly. They feared the Lord, but then they went right back to serving other gods, but they still were afraid of God. But this also goes into a certain point. Like I said, outside of a moment, if you're beyond the moment of fearing the Lord, does that mean that you're going to necessarily follow? No. You can do a lot of things. There's a lot of people that fear God in moments. I mean, think about every single form of Christianity that's out there. I guarantee you, in some way, shape, or form, they fear the Lord. They do in certain points. But is it
When
their
lightning,
whole life?
I was about to say, when lightning strikes right in front of you, you fear God then.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Or when you start getting close to death, that's
Uh-oh.
what will do it the most.
You repeat what you just said?
I said that's why when people are going to seek after God, when do they do it the most?
Deathbed.
Yeah, deathbed, prison, when they're at the lowest of the low in their life. So then we go into 34. Now going to it, when it said about unto this day they do after the former manners. They fear not the Lord, neither do they after their own statutes and after their ordinances, or after the law and commandment which the Lord commanded the children of Jacob, whom he named Israel. Now, we said before we were talking about the Assyrians, right?
Mhm.
So we are talking about the Assyrians, but there's a switch up here. And when I asked you, how do we know? Oh, how do you know it's the Israelites? Well, what does it say at the end of 34?
You're talking about after they do not fear the Lord, neither do they after their statutes or after their ordinances or after the law and commandment which the Lord commanded the children of Jacob, whom he named Israel. That's why when
Mm-hmm.
I read that, that's what made me first think the part of they fear not the Lord. The first thing I thought was the children of Israel from the end of that verse.
But look at the context of what it's saying. After the law and commandment which the Lord commanded the children of Jacob, whom he named Israel. Is that talking
Mhm.
about Israel in the first person or third person?
Third person.
Mm-hmm. So are we talking about the children of Israel actually in 34?
Or actually, we're talking about whoever's there in that area at the time, then, if we're going third person.
Exactly. So even then, this is something you got to work on, and everybody got to work on this too. Just because the name is propped up does not mean that that's the main focus. Looking at 32 through 33, we're talking about the Assyrians that took over the land of Israel. And then in 34, it said, unto this day they do after the former manners, or what they
In
did
other
before.
in other words, we have the Assyrians who they fear God. They have the priest that can tell them what they're supposed to be doing in the land, but they don't do it.
Exactly. And it said, they fear not the Lord, neither do they after their statutes and after their ordinances. So after their own statutes and their own ordinances, or after the law and commandment which the Lord commanded the children of Jacob, whom he named Israel. So now we're going into all the details that were given about the children of Israel, right? We
Right?
have that God gave him gave the laws, God gave him all this stuff. And then in 35, what's going on in
About
35?
well, with whom the Lord had made a covenant. We're still continuing the Lord and the covenant with Israel. Not worshiping or not. Don't fear other gods. Don't bow yourself to. Don't worship other gods. Sacrifice to those other gods. Only fear God. The Lord. The same Lord that got you saved you out of Egypt, basically, with His power and making sure you
Good.
fear God and sacrifice to God, the one and true God.
And then in
So we're
36,
that's what God saving them out of Egypt. They're making sure that they fear God, the one true God, and sacrifice to the one true God. That would be 36.
now this is where it could be confusing. In 36, is it still talking to the Assyrians?
Aren't we just getting a reminder of what God had said as a rule for the children of Israel?
Good. How do we know that?
Oh, I'm still going by from 35 to 36 because it's the 35 didn't really end. It has that like semicolon, so it's like continuing.
Exactly. But how do we, but what in 35 is it? Because you didn't really say it. It's not
Oh,
about the
with
punctuation.
the Lord making the covenant with whom the Lord had made a covenant and charged them, saying, He didn't make a covenant with the Assyrians. He made a covenant with the children of Israel, the generations after Jacob.
No, no, but good try. You're in the right spot, but that's the wrong explanation. Let me give somebody a chance. Let's go with Kivana. Give you the first chance. How do
Say
we
that
know
again?
from 35 that 36 is not talking to the children of Israel?
Let me read 36 again.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Look, Lord, his God, his they shall
And I'll say the question one more time to keep in mind as you're reading. How do we know from verse 35 that 36 is not talking to the children of Israel?
Is it where it says he brought you up out of the land of Egypt? And that's how we know?
Nope. Keep in mind my
No?
question. I said, how do we know from verse 35 that 36 is not talking to the children of Israel?
Oh, okay. I read it backwards then. I'm not sure then. Yeah, I'm not sure.
All right. Then let's go with all right, Thomas, I'll give you the chance.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
All right. I'm gonna point it out in verse 35 and I'll tell you when it goes. Because we had this covenant that was going on, and it's describing Israel in the third person. Then it says in 35, with whom the Lord had made a covenant and charged them, saying, that's where it is. That's how we know. Charles, how does the saying word give us that context?
How does the saying word give us the context of God
How
talking
do
to
how do we
the
know that
children,
36 is not actually talking to the children of Israel?
but in the third person sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I thought it was what I had brought up earlier. Other than that, I don't know right now.
All right. So the reason that we know that it's not literally talking to the children of Israel is because starting from 34 into 35, we have the children of Israel and God being talked about in the third person. Then we get to verse 35, where it brings up the covenant with the Lord, but it says, and charged them, saying, Charles, is charged the present tense, future tense, or past tense word?
Past tense.
So everything after the word saying, is that something that God is saying right now, is talking about for the future, or something that's just being quoted from the past?
Quoted from the past.
Good. So if it's being quoted from the past, then what's actually going on in this verse is that the writer is just explaining about how the Assyrians did not fear the Lord anymore, how they did not follow after the statutes or anything of the law of the children of Israel was given, even though they brought a priest. And so all that's happening from 34 to 36 is listing all the ways that they failed to follow and bring in examples. Well, the law, the covenant that God had given to the children of Israel, when he told them, you shall not fear other gods. So we had that going on from 32 and 36. You see how that gave that context, Charles?
So
Kivana
what
and
I said
Thomas?
earlier was the way I explained it.
Is the way you explained it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
This is your biggest problem, and this is something that you're going to have to work on for years to come. But I'm always going to want to be there because this is something that's extremely important. If you don't phrase something correctly, you will give a false interpretation.
Then I can
If
take
I
something out of
tell,
context.
yeah, and unintentionally too. If I was talking to some chick named Jasmine and she started undressing in front of me and I stopped her, I said, what are you doing? And I kicked her out of my house. If I take that same scenario and I word it differently, I was talking to this woman Jasmine, and then I said like, well, I tried to kick her out of my house, but then she started undressing. You see how the entire context changed of that situation?
The assumptions change too.
Yeah, well, that's part of the context is the assumptions you give off. When all I did was switch which came first, the kick out and the undressing. If I say that she tried to undress and then I kicked her out, that shows me trying to stop her from doing something wrong, getting naked in front of me, and we're not married. But in the other side, I was ready to kick her out and she started undressing. That has a meaning that we most likely had made love or something else happened. But one thing it guarantees does not show is that she no longer was kicked out. And all I did was switch when something happened in my sentence, and the entire scenario changed. You see what I'm saying, Charles?
I see what you're saying.
So, and this is for everybody. When you're doing your explanations, this is something you need to be cautious on. And it's going to take a while to get there, but you have to do it. If you explain something wrong, just like that scenario I gave, you can switch it to where you're the one in the right and the other person is in the wrong, and switch it vice versa. I mean, and we see this all the time in movies and shows, and especially they'll usually have a female character will do this, where the character will be the one in the wrong. But when they go to explain the scenario to their friends, Kivana and Thomas, how does the female character in movies and stuff usually explain it? Do they admit that they're actually in the wrong?
You can make somebody seem crazy when you only tell one side, when they only hear one side of the story.
Exactly. A man could be, you know what's a perfect example of this? Chris Brown. Everybody knew about the situation that happened with Chris Brown and Rihanna. But the only thing they knew was that Chris Brown put his hands on Rihanna and she got bruised up. And everybody was looking at him like he's the villain. And then it finally came out years down the road after it doesn't matter anymore. It came out that she was hitting him the entire time, multiple occasions. And this was just the final time where he actually exploded. Now, Charles, if I just hit a woman out of nowhere, and on a separate example, if I've been getting hit by a woman and then I finally explode hitting her back, is that the same scenario?
Those two scenarios aren't the same. No.
No, not at all. But because they only had one side of it, it looked like Chris Brown was the villain. Now, he's still stupid and it is still partly his fault because you don't stay in an abusive relationship. That's your fault for staying. But it does take away that victimness that Rihanna was painting herself as, when in reality, the entire time, she was actually the aggressor that was starting the problems. So, now then, let me go ahead and go to the second section. I swear by the time years down the road go on, I'm going to hear you guys randomly say now then, and I'm going to just start laughing. All right. So, any comments or questions before we read the second section? Give a couple seconds. All right. Now then. And the statutes and the ordinances and the laws and the commandment which he wrote for you, you shall observe to do these things, do forevermore, and ye shall not fear other gods. And the covenant that I have made with you, ye shall not forget, neither shall ye fear other gods. But the Lord your God shall ye fear, and he shall deliver you out of the hand of all your enemies. Howbeit they did not hearken, but they did after their former manner. So these nations feared the Lord and served their graven images, both their children and their children's children, as did their fathers, so do they unto this day. So now we have a finishing up of what was God saying and what was told to the children of Israel. And notice as we're reading through, this goes back to a very important point. Look at the way it's written and what God had said all the way through to verse 39. Now, Kivana, if you read 37 to 39, does that sound like we're talking about the Assyrians?
Just by reading, no.
You said what?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, not at all. If we didn't have the fact of what we read last time or the last section of this was God saying this, if we didn't have that context, then 37 to 39 makes it sound like the whole Assyrians being told this stuff, Assyrians being judged, whatever. That whole thing sounds like that has nothing to do with this. But because we had that saying, and because we had that, this is still part of what God had told to the children of Israel, this is still God speaking. This is still his words. This is not what's happening right now. This is what God told the children of Israel at the time when he told them it. And then we have some confirmation. Now with 40 and 41, with those in mind, are we able to, does it still sound like we're talking to the children of Israel or talking about the children of Israel right now? I'll go with Charles.
No.
Exactly. But how? That's the question then. And I'll go
How does
with,
it? Oh,
oh yeah, go ahead, Charles. I'll go with you.
how does it sound like we're still not talking about the children of Israel?
Exactly. How does it in 40 and 41, what about those show that it confirms we are talking about the Assyrians and everyone that took over the land of Israel and not about the children of Israel themselves?
Be it they did not hearken, but they did after their former manner. These nations, after the part of they did after their former manner.
Good.
These nations feared the Lord. If we were talking about children of Israel, it would have labeled them something. It wouldn't label them as these nations.
Exactly. The children of Israel are one nation, the nation of Israel. The closest you could get is to say the tribe of Judah or the Jews, as it said. But we've never heard them said in any other way as a nations. It's not the nation of Israel and the nation of Benjamin. It's the tribe of Benjamin in the nation of Israel, the tribe of Judah. So when we look at that, the way that it phrases these nations, we know that it is confirmed that the 39 was still part of God's quote, and 40 and 41 confirm that we're still talking about the Assyrians, that though they did fear God, they didn't follow. And so with that being said, it goes back into the original point that I said before. If you're in a moment of fearing God, like this is the moment I really fear God, are you going to be capable of doing something sinful, Charles?
All right, ask that again.
If you're in a moment where you fear God, you're in a moment of that, are you going to be doing something sinful?
No.
No. But if you have a generic fear of God, where it's like, oh, well, I'm afraid he might hurt us type, not like a true, the true following, not like you're in the moment of it or like your lifestyle is this, but generically, could you live a life of sin and still have fear of God? And I'll
Yeah,
go
you can
to,
still. Oh, my
oh,
bad.
okay. No, you're good. I'll go to Thomas with that one.
What's your question?
If you're not in a moment where you're really fearing God, like you're truly fearing God, but you're just in a generic moment of like, oh, well, I know what God is capable of. Can you live a life of sin with that fear? That kind of fear, I should say?
Yeah, you still can.
Yeah. People do it all the time. Look at every single religion on earth. And as a matter of fact, the total population. Let's look at this real quick. How many people believe in the Judeo-Christian God? All right, so according to Pew Research Center, about 54% of US adults believe in God as described in the Bible. However, the percentage of people who believe in the Judeo-Christian God varies depending on their religions. About 80% of self-identified Christians believe in the God of the Bible. However, 20% of Christians don't believe in the biblical description of God. So, and it says 4 out of 5 adults say they believe in God. Of the believers, 70%. So when we're looking at this and we look at the mass amount, we're talking about millions upon millions of people that have some fear of God. But it's not like they're actually living in that. They're not actually living by that. It's not like in a moment where you're truly having that fear run your life, the fear of God. It's just an abstract fear, much like these people here, the Assyrians and all these other nations that were here. Yeah, there's some fear of God. I mean, he sent lions to kill them. And so the first thing they did was, okay, we got to figure out how to not die. This also goes into what we said last time about the difference between trying to avoid hell versus trying to serve God. Someone who's trying to avoid hell does fear God, but they're not a servant of God, as we talked about last time. Now then, any comments or questions before we go to the final section? Or I should say, as we go to the final section? Then go ahead, Charles.
All right. We'll be getting into 2 Kings chapter 18, verses 1 to 4. I'm going to give it a couple seconds. All right, verse 1. Now it came to pass in the 3rd year of Hosea, son of Elah, king of Israel, that Hezekiah is a known word, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's what I was saying before. Hezekiah is a known name. It's a regular
Hezekiah,
name.
yeah.
You've probably heard it in subconscious where it sounds familiar to you even.
Yeah. That Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. 25 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name also was Abi. Let me confirm that. Abby, or Abi, the daughter of
How does
Zechariah.
it spell in the phonetic?
Abee.
Where's the dash?
Oh, AB dash EE.
Okay, that's Abby. Ah would
Abby.
be AH, remember? Or AW. And then it would be dash and then BEE.
So this would be Abby.
Yep.
Abby. All right.
Like Young Frankenstein, Abby normal.
You lost me with that. Verse 3.
What?
And he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that David his father did. He removed the high places and break the images and cut down the groves and break in pieces the brazen serpent that Moses had made. For unto those days the children of Israel did burn incense to it. And he called it, let me go to this, Nehush. Give me a second. Nehushtan. There we go. Nehushtan.
Nehushtan.
Yeah.
Think like Kazakhstan, but Nehushtan.
I was thinking about that too. So Now we start off we're in Hosea's third year as king of Israel. Starts Hezekiah, his kingdomhood of being king in Judah. He was 25 when he started being king, and he was king for 20 and 29 years for Judah. We got his mother's name as well, and it talked about him doing what was good, what was right in the eyes of God. And we finally got somebody getting rid of some high places. So he got rid of the high places, and it talked about breaking down images, groves, and brazen. Well, I'm gonna go back to the brazen serpent in a minute, but the images and groves are just the idolatry of other gods. Getting rid of those, breaking them down. Now, I talked about this brazen serpent that Moses had made, which is funny because it brought up that the children of Israel burnt incense to this serpent. And we have a name for it as well. Matt, if I remember correctly, didn't God tell Moses to make this serpent way back then? It was a
Was
long
it a
time ago.
serpent?
Well, it was like a how do I explain this? It's like a he made God told him to make something, and it was of the image of a serpent, if I'm not mistaken.
You sure about that?
No, I'm not. It's been so long since because it was so fast when we talked about it. Let me go back.
Mm-hmm.
That was way in Numbers.
Yeah.
And the Lord said unto Moses, make thee a fiery serpent and set it upon a pole. And it shall come to pass that everyone that is bitten, when he looketh upon it, shall live. And Moses made a serpent of brass and put it on a pole. And it came to pass that if a serpent had bitten any man, when he beheld the serpent of brass, he lived. So it's like what Tip talks about brazen. So like a brass type serpent on a pole.
Exactly. But what was it used for? What did you just read?
Um, and it shall come to pass that everyone that is bitten, when he looketh upon it, shall live. So if anyone's bitten, if you look upon it, you'll live.
Yeah. So it's supposed to be just a tool that God had given Moses to use.
Not something you're supposed to offer it like incense, burn incense for it. So it's good
Now,
that
where do
we're
we
reading
have
about
this today?
uh, would
There's
sage
two
count as this?
massive. No, hold on, let me finish.
Oh,
There's two major examples of this in Christianity today. Just two, but they're massive. Well, actually, I'd say more than two, but there's two massive ones in different forms of Christianity today. That's
that
your
are
hint.
just like this
Mm-hmm.
that are in Christianity today. Wait, you're not talking about the one example being the Jesus piece. You're not talking about that, right? Ah, okay. I see
Yeah,
where you're going with it.
that is one. The Jesus piece is supposed to be an example, just to represent that that you believe in Christ. That was the origin. It was just a tool to show the faith you had. The difference being between the serpent and the Jesus piece is that the serpent was a tool to heal people or to keep people healthy even in the midst of the poison. But with the Jesus piece, it's just supposed to be a representation. But how are Jesus pieces treated, Charles? Actually, no, let me give somebody else a chance. Kivana, how are Jesus pieces treated?
Like a show off type of thing, not symbolizing anything spiritually. It's like flossing type thing.
Yeah, like frosting, that's one way. It's just like to show off, to look good. How else are Jesus pieces used, Thomas?
To show what you believe in, your beliefs.
I wouldn't say more so that it is part of it, but that's the original, but that's not how people normally use it today. Do people kiss their Jesus pieces, Thomas?
Yes, they do that in prayer and stuff like that.
Yeah, is that just showing you believe what you believe?
They make it seem like there's power in the Jesus piece.
Yeah, there you go. They treat it like it has power of itself. When they go to pray, they'll kiss their Jesus piece. Idolatry, worshiping it as if it's Christ himself. They'll use it for arrogance, showing off, and they'll use it as a means of worship, worshiping their Jesus piece. What would happen, Charles, if you went into somebody's house who had a Jesus piece and you showed them the Bible that's in 9 times out of 10, because there are exceptions, 9 times out of 10, you showed them in the Bible where it's wrong and you go to grab it to throw it out?
We're whoever I'm grab, whoever's chain it belongs to, we're fighting now because it's probably either tempered gold, plated gold, or real gold. So we're fighting now if I grab it and try to throw it out.
What if it's just a wooden piece?
We're probably still fighting. They're still going to take it some kind of way.
Yeah, exactly. They worship it like it's Jesus himself, forgetting the fact that this is not, it's just a tool. It's not no power in it. Now, Charles, you were on for this. Where did we see the children of Israel using a tool as if it was God's power when it was just a tool, not the power of God itself? We read this before. I don't know if you remember it though. Charles.
Oh, my bad. I didn't know I was muted. Ark of the Covenant, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. The children of Israel were supposed to not go to war. They weren't doing right by God. They're supposed to get right with God first. Instead, they're like, well, every time we've brought this ark with us, we've won the battle. Let's just bring the ark. We ain't got to be right with God. We got the ark. That's the power of God. And then they lost the ark to the Philistines. They had this whole situation going on, Charles. Remember, it was hilarious. Chris, you might remember where they had hemorrhoids.
Wasn't this the same one where the Philistines took it and God killed their God, took their head off? Was that the same one?
Literally, yeah, the fish god Dagon. And not only that, but he struck all the Philistine tribes that had it at the time with hemorrhoids.
And I remember that.
Yeah, now you remember. So with that being said, we've had multiple examples of people doing this today, just like this serpent. They worship that Jesus piece. It ain't just a tool, but we see this also with other things, a rosary. Now, Kivana, I'll give you the first chance. Do you know what a rosary is for? Don't forget to unmute, Kivana.
No, I don't.
Okay. Thomas, do you know what a rosary is for?
Does it have to deal with Virgin Mary?
It does.
Like the same concept. I don't know. That's as far as I'm not even gonna guess.
All right. Good try though. The first part was accurate. Charles, do you know what the rosary is for?
No, I've never heard of it.
A rosary is a necklace that has a bunch of you can call them balls or pebbles or something that go throughout it. Catholics use it. Well, not just Catholics, but mainly Catholics. When they have to pray for forgiveness because of their sins, the father, as they call it, actually just the priest, tells them how many prayers they need to say, how many Hail Marys. That's where the term Hail Mary comes from in football. It comes from the Catholic religion and a Hail Mary prayer. You're just hoping it works out. And so they're worshiping Mary, the mother of Jesus, who, as great as she was, and we're grateful for she existed and everything, was just a woman. And so there was nothing else. She was not a savior. She's not God. She is nobody to be worshipped at all. But that's literally what they do. They pray to Mary and they hold on to this rosary, this necklace, and that's part of how they connect to it. So we're taking something that even from their own Catholic religion is just supposed to be a symbol of the religion, but instead they used it for idolatry, for the worship of idols. And that's what it ended up becoming. And that's what it is. So we see that this same thing that's happening here with the snake, which is just supposed to be a tool to protect people from snake bites. So they went die from the poison. And these people are worshiping it like it's a god. They even gave it a name. Charles, imagine you're so enveloped to worship something other than God that you give something a name that didn't have one.
I mean, didn't we all do that as kids?
Existed object. You
Yeah,
said what?
didn't we all do that as kids?
Yeah. Imaginary friends. Well, I never did that, but imaginary friends. That's an example. You just give something a name. Oh, this is my teddy bear. His name is Johnny. It's an inanimate object, Charles. It's an inanimate object, Matt. Yeah, but I'm giving it a personality. I'm giving it all this stuff. See, even today, people can impose the beliefs that they want to believe on other people. And they do it all the time, but not just on people, even on inanimate objects. Take politics, for example. There are people who claim Christianity, but then they also say that they're Democrat. Now, based on what the Democrats approve of and believe in, go with Tivana. Can you be a biblical Christian and be a Democrat?
Huh?
Can you be well, actually, I don't know. Do you know what the Democrats actually stand for and what they believe in?
No, but I thought they differ. They're all the same. Industrial.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you can pass me with that one. I don't
Yeah,
know.
my bad. Let me just say this before you cut off. Yeah, Democrats have set policies in that they stand for, as do Republicans, and it's overall there's a few of them, and then there's things that they differ about. But there's, like, for example, Democrats are pro-abortion. That's one example. Democrats are big government. That's another example. So I'll go to Charles. You know a little bit more about the Democrats and Republicans, especially from our conversations. Can you be a biblical Christian and be a Democrat?
No.
No, not at all, right?
Right.
And why is that? Give one example as to why.
One example, or you took the best one. Oh, all of us, we know in the Bible it talks about you don't work, you don't eat. We probably know some policies from that side, from the Democratic side, where if you don't work, you still can eat. We don't have nothing against people personally, but long story short, if you have the ability to work, then you should be able to work and eat. Not you have the ability, but you voted for a particular party that allows you to take advantage of different systems that comes out of our tax dollars. See what I'm saying?
Exactly. See, in the Democrat Party, one of their big things that they strive for is socialism in healthcare, socialism in medical care, and among other things. So, like, just because somebody doesn't have a job at the time, what they say is it's to help people in a time of need, but they don't want any restrictions on it. Like, for example, with when it comes to universal basic income. Now, universal basic income is the idea that everybody gets a flat check. Here's the problem. Who's going to pay for that money? Where is the money from that going to come from? What ends up happening is the money that goes to that comes from the taxes of the people in the future. So all the inflation that we see with the food and with the cost of rent and all that stuff, that all traces back to overspending and just printing the US dollar during COVID, let alone every other time. That's why it got better under Trump and then went back worse under Biden. It was because of the policies on that. But it's this idea that we need to be loving. But there's a better example of this. Democrats believe that in their policies that transgenderism, they believe in their policies about people should be able to lose their job and be able to lose their livelihood if they don't want to serve somebody that is transgender, or if they don't want to agree with somebody that's transgender. There was a woman's waxing place in Canada that lost their business license because they were only trained to wax women, but there was a man who was trying to transition as a woman who wanted to go in there, but they couldn't help him because they only wax women, different body parts, different setup. And so they lost their business license and almost went to jail over that. There was a Christian baker who a gay couple wanted to force him to make them a wedding cake. Now, I don't know if he was biblically Christian, but on the Democrat side, they say that the Christian baker was hateful and discriminating, when in reality, they could have found any baker else. Why did you want the Christian baker to be the one to bake you a wedding cake when you know it goes against his beliefs? Because that was the point the whole time. So are there problems in the Republican Party? Yeah. But some of the main points of Democrat policies are strictly anti-Christianity, not just indifferent, not just not caring. So no, you cannot be a biblical Christian and be a Democrat. You could be a biblical Christian and be independent. You could be a biblical Christian and be a conservative or Republican. But because of what that party stands for and what they are and what their selected policies are, it is an impossibility to be a biblical Christian and also be a Democrat. So people will treat their religion as that. But it's not just on the Democrat side. Thomas, do you know what happened on the Republican side in the vote in New Hampshire?
Man, you know I don't do politics, man.
All right. I figured not, but I figured I'd give a chance because I going in order. Kivana, Charles, and you. Kivana, Charles, and you. So I had to give you the chance. In New Hampshire, they voted for a literal, not a metaphor, a literal Satanist. Someone who follows the religion of Satan, not just the idea of Satanism. And they voted for that person because they just voted Republican down the line. So their politics were so enveloped in it, Republican, 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 that they didn't think about what the policy positions the person actually held. They didn't think it through. And in doing so, they voted in somebody who is literally anti-Christian, who is a literal Satanist. So not only is it with Jesus pieces, not only is it with the rosary, not only is it with objects, but it's also with ideals. It's also with politics. And it's not just on Democrat side, it's on Republican side. It's on all sides. If you allow yourself, like they did here, even something that's just supposed to be a tool, if you allow yourself to be so enveloped in your passion and your following of it, that very thing that you think you know so much about could become the idol that is more important to you than God. And how do we know that with the Republican side too? Charles, Does God want us to vote and not be informed of what we're voting on? To just vote D down the line or vote R down the line? Are we supposed to be just like following the masses?
No, we're supposed to vote for whoever supports, whoever supports God, whoever supports Jesus.
Exactly. So if there happened to be a Democrat who was more in line with Christianity than a Republican, can I vote for that Republican?
You want to vote for the Democrat because the Democrat's the one that goes down the line of following God, following Jesus.
Exactly. And then on the same token, in the opposite, Charles, if it's the Republican that happens to be more towards Christianity, do I vote for the Democrat?
Vote for the Republican.
Exactly. But if all I'm doing is just voting down the line with what I've been taught or told is the right thing and not actually looking up their policies, I could be voting for somebody who is strictly anti-Christian. I could be voting for somebody who everything they stand for is against me. This happens, and this is the last thing I'm gonna say is this example before we get back to the scriptural part, is that this is what happens 90% of the time with Black folks in voting. Every 4 years when the presidency is voted for, the Black vote goes 80 to 90% in favor of Democrats. But if you ask Democrats, Democrat people, what their policies they agree upon and everything, 99% of the things they agree with are actually Republican, not Democrat. But they didn't do the research. They think that from being told either the Republicans are racist or you have to vote Democrat if you're Black or whatever have you, whatever the excuse or reason is, but it's not thought through. And so it ends up being the same problem over and over again. So again, back to that main point, when you don't think things through, you can end up in your own idolatry. Just like in verse 4, where thankfully, finally, somebody took down these places. But the very fact that they even had that serpent, which was just a tool, and they started worshiping it like it was a god, it's the same thing with politics, with religious pieces, with clothing brands. And it's the same thing with our jobs. Same thing with everything. Anything can be an idol to you. What makes it an idol is it more important to you than what God has required, than what God has called? So that's the big takeaway from this. Thankfully, we have Hezekiah. He's doing right. Now, Charles, is he doing right the same way the kings we had before now?
No, I brought up him doing right, just like according to all that David did.
Yeah.
So he's
He
in a
did
different
right
boat.
according to all that David did. Now, this is the first time in a long time that we've seen them break down these walls, that we've seen them break down these places of worship. So we'll see what ends up happening. One more question for each of the three of you before we pray it out. Kivana, what do you see possibly happening, considering the fact we see that Hezekiah is actually doing right by God in all the ways of David, unlike the kings we read before? Where do you see this possibly going?
God finding favor in him, you know.
Let's say that one more time.
God finding favor in him, whether setting him somewhere
Yeah.
high or, putting him out there. He set that
Okay, yeah.
example.
That's a definite possibility. God finds favor in him. God gives him favor. His life starts going real nice, real sweet life. Start going real nice for him. That's a definite possibility. Charles?
But that's the best possibility right there.
Yeah, that's true.
That's the
No, I
best
wouldn't say
possibility.
that's the best.
I'm trying to think of one. Other than God showing
Okay, then
favor.
I only want you thinking about something better because I want to push you to that limit. There is something way better that could happen than just him being lifted up. Think about that while I give Thomas a chance. Thomas,
Okay.
what's another likely possibility that could happen from the fact that Hezekiah is actually doing right in all the ways at the same with David? What's another possibility besides what Kivana said? And it could be less, it could be bad, it could be good, it could be better, it could be worse. What do you think is most likely thing to happen from this?
By him doing right, it's reflected onto others in comparison to what everybody else did. And like Ivana said, him just being uplifted by God.
So what do you mean by lifted and put onto others? Like in what way?
Reflecting because everybody who was in some type of power previously, I can't even freaking talk. They impacted Israel in a bad way, right? So
Well,
maybe
I'm at, like, give me an example of like what you mean, like because your answer is so broad that it could either be right or wrong. Get a little bit more specific with your answer. Give me an example.
they ain't got to worry about famines and
Okay, so
plagues and stuff
because
like that.
okay, cool, cool, cool. All right, cool. So because he's so faithful, maybe the favor that he gets from God, that favor also works towards the rest of the people. And they don't have to deal with famines or whatever. Maybe they get brought back to Israel and saved from these things, the situation. Okay, so maybe the people find favor. Now, Charles,
I was gonna put that in.
your job is to try to think of what is the best case scenario that could happen from this.
I was about to say I was gonna put the bring the children of Israel back to their land. That was one thing I was gonna add into mine, but to when he brings them back to actually break it down and let them know, like, hey, look, we won't have opportunities like this. We need everybody to start like what we do with the Bible studies and everything. We need people to pay attention, study, know the laws, understand the laws, so that way we're all on one accord and we don't get kicked off this land again. Making the children of Israel understand and study and learn the word and follow the word as they should be, the rules at that time, while bringing them
Good.
back.
That right there is the best case scenario.
Is it?
That's the best case. Yes.
Okay.
If they find favor in God's eyes, Hezekiah gets lifted up, but not everybody of Israel starts doing right. You got all those souls that are still living in corruption and possibly going to a lake of fire. So though there is some positivity, you're still leaving that room for that negative aspect. And then in Thomas's aspect, maybe the favor that Hezekiah gets also helps out the children of Israel. So now in that aspect, it's a little bit better. That Hezekiah is doing well, but also the children of Israel don't have no diseases, and maybe they get saved from where they're at. But that still doesn't mean that they necessarily are following, because the blessing could be because of Hezekiah. And in that situation, you still have souls that are at risk of damnation. So though it's better than the option that Kivana gave, it's still not quite the best option. But in your option, we have where he starts getting them to follow. Now, the reason why that's better than just finding favor, does God set up his enemies to be in better positions than his children of Israel at times, Charles?
At times, yeah, just in case they be, disobedient or anything.
Exactly. So is there a possibility that Hezekiah gets lifted up and because God knows that he's going to fall away later and right now he's doing right, so it's setting up for that? Yeah, that's
Possible.
possible.
Yeah, possible.
Is it also possible that the children of Israel find favor because Hezekiah is being so faithful that more than all the kings we had recently, and we had at least like 20 different kings type thing, that all of them were doing wickedness in some way. Some were all wicked, some were partially, but every single one of them was wicked in some way, shape, or form. So here we have that, where this is the first time in forever that we got a king who's really trying to follow God, at least for the moment. So the children of Israel could get blessed by it. But if their hearts have not been changed, if they're not following God, then they're going to fall away. What did we see every single time we saw the children of Israel fall away, even when they had a righteous king? Charles, what was the one common thing every single time, whether the king was doing right by God or not?
Falling away. Didn't we see them like worship? We heard Baal a lot. Baal used to come up a lot.
That's on the
The
right
groves
track,
will
but there
come up.
was one thing that would, what is that? What are you describing generically?
Worshiping another god rather than just the one true
Yeah.
God.
Every single time they fell away, one thing was always constant. And it was constant when there were kings trying to do right by God, and it was constant when people were trying to do evil against God. It didn't matter. Every single time they fell away, there was one common thread: idolatry, not putting God first. So the fact that Hezekiah, if he were to teach them to start following God according to his word, not only do we have salvation of Hezekiah, not only do we have the children of Israel being blessed by it and Hezekiah being blessed by it possibly, but also we have at minimum one whole generation that might be prepped and ready to go to heaven when the time comes and in paradise. So that option that you gave is the best case scenario. Now, what is a worst case scenario that could happen from this, Charles?
The worst case,
Mm-hmm.
with him doing right in the eyes of the Lord, worst case could be he dies and well, no, we've already gotten through them being non loyal. What's worse than not being loyal and getting kicked out the land? The tribe of Judah being wiped completely. That's as worse as it gets now. At this point,
Well, not just the tribe of Judah. The
the
worst
children
case
of Israel,
scenario, yeah,
all of the children of Israel just being wiped entirely.
yeah.
That's as bad as it can get. I don't think
So
it
the
can get
worst case
any.
scenario from this that could happen, which is possible, even though it's very unlikely, is that because Hezekiah is trying to do right by God, and if the children of Israel, whether in the tribe of Judah or what have you, if they're that against it, maybe they kill Hezekiah. Maybe they sacrifice Hezekiah to their gods that they serve instead of the one true God. And because of that, because it's so far gone, and how he was a righteous man following God, even getting rid of the other stuff, if they did that, there's a possibility that God turns away from them as his people completely for the moment, even more so than in the past. Because when we see from Abraham and the promised Messiah that we've read about so many times, do the children of Israel today, do every tribe need to be alive for that to happen? No. You literally only need the tribe of Judah. But you could have all of Israel be killed off in the meantime. So keep that in mind. That's the worst case scenario, is that Hezekiah is doing so good that the wicked people of Israel at this time, they ain't having it. They want to live in their sin. Now, and this will be the last question entirely, then we'll pray it out. Kivana, you ever known somebody that's so enveloped in wanting to live in their sin that the smallest bit of correction, even if you say it gently, it turns into a whole you're their enemy? Oh,
Hmm. No, I don't think I've ever encountered someone like that.
oh,
I
that's
guess
nice.
that's good or bad, but no, I haven't. Honestly,
I am
thank God.
happy for you.
Yeah.
Thomas, I know you have.
I know you know I have.
Yes, I do. So Thomas, when somebody becomes your enemy on that level, does that eneminess just stop at conversations of God? Don't
Sorry, what was
forget
the
to
question?
unmute. I said, them being your enemy, does that stop at just the conversations of God?
Oh no.
Nah, it goes into everything, every aspect of life. If I call you out when you don't want to be doing right, when you're anti doing right, because there's a difference between just not doing something versus being against doing it. When you're against doing it and I call you out, I don't just become your enemy in things of God, I become your enemy in everything. And Kivana, I am super happy you never dealt with this person because I have dealt with these kind of people. Thomas has dealt with this kind of people. Charles, I know you've dealt with this kind of people, and they will lie about you to the very people you love the most and make you out to look like you're a monster. One of the worst human beings to ever exist. Like you should be buried beneath a prison, not even in the prison. That's how far they'll go when they don't want to do right and you correct them on the thing that they need to do right. That's how far they'll go. So we'll see what ends up happening. Hopefully, it's the best case scenario. And we really hope it's not the worst. But we'll find out next time. All right. Now then, Charles, why don't you go ahead and pray us out? Don't
All right,
forget to unmute. Yep.
everybody, go ahead and bow your heads. Father, thank you for giving us this. This study was an interesting one. There was some good ways to practice the context. There was some things that popped up that I should have been paying attention to that I need to pay attention to for the next time. But I'm glad it did pop up because it hasn't popped up in a while. Um, Even more so, we're getting into Hezekiah, and I want to read more and learn more about Hezekiah and what happens going forward with him. Um, Separate from that, I pray we're all getting a good rest and that we're all prepared for Sunday tomorrow. And yeah, in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right, everybody. Have a wonderful night.